Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our topic number 2 of semester 2, and it's about porosity and permeability. So it's all about the water flow through soil, how water flows through soil. Let's take a look. So if we look at this natural phenomenon on Earth, there are two cities here, and after a big rainstorm, one city has this muddy landscape, and then the other one is flooded. And our big guiding question is that we're going to answer at the end of this video is we have Houston, Texas, and Denver, Colorado. And the question is, which city has a larger / smaller particle size, and why do we say that? So let's take a look. First, we need to get to the source of where water, how water enters the soil. So at the top of our atmosphere, we have these things called clouds. And these clouds release water. Okay. When water comes out of the clouds, we call that precipitation. You may be familiar with this word from middle school or other science classes in high school. So precipitation, such as snow, hail, sleet, and rain. And this water enters the soil, okay, and it moves down through the soil. You probably, any point of your life, have seen or a mud, or have stepped in mud, and what distinguishes mud from soil is the water that is in it. So soil mixed with water, we call that mud. So water is moving down, and when water is moving down through the soil, there's a name for that. Okay, we call that infiltration. All right, water moving down through the soil. Now, why is water moving down through the soil? Because gravity is pulling it down. Okay, now the ability of water to move down through soil, the ability of water moving down through soil is called permeability. So here's a diagram again. There's precipitation, okay, coming from the clouds. It enters the earth soil, and these little circles represent the small soil particles, okay, otherwise known as sediment. You're familiar with that word. So water is flowing through or in between these spaces of the soil particles down, okay, and the ability of this water to flow down, we call that permeability. So here it says water flow through soil is permeability. I guess this got erased here. Let me just add this. Through soil is permeability. Now let's zoom in on this. So water is coming down, flowing, because gravity is pulling it down. And these soil particles have spaces in between them. Let me try to highlight these spaces. Okay, here's space right here, spaces right here, space right here. In between these soil particles are empty spaces, and this is exactly where water wants to go. Water flows into the direction of these empty spaces. So here's what's going to happen. This water, these water droplets right here, okay, this water is going to enter here, and it's going to flow all the way down until it cannot go down anymore, until it reaches solid bedrock. So it's going to happen. Sometimes it flows like this. Sometimes it flows like this. And it's going to move down through those spaces. These spaces are important for water to flow down, because if there are no spaces there, what's going to happen? if there are no spaces in between soil particles. So here's another scenario. There's a different types of soil. There's a different type of soil other than the one on the left side. So this soil, for example, perhaps at another part of the world, has very, very small particles that are so tightly packed together, they don't hardly have any space to pass through. Okay? So this water droplet is going to want to go through, and it can't find any spaces to go through. Or perhaps it can, but it takes time for it to go through. So let's take a look. Where are the spaces? We have a little space right here. Maybe a tiny one right here. Little one right here. Little one here. Little one here. Hardly anything here at the top. So this water, as it wants to go through, it's going to start to get stuck. And if more rain is coming from the top, okay, the water will eventually start to go up. And where will the water go? It's going to start to flood. And it's perhaps going to move across the land if there's no spaces in between the rock, or the spaces in between the soil, to be exact. So this blue area here, by the way, the spaces, they're called pores. And the ability of soils to have these pores, this is called porosity. By the way, a teachable moment is our skin also has pores, air pockets. So the question is, what happens when the space in between the soil particles increases? When the space increases, the permeability, or the ability of water to flow through, increases as well. When you have low porosity, or the spaces in between the soil particles, when there's smaller space, the ability of water to flow through decreases. And it's not flowing through, it's just going to flow across the land. So the relationship between porosity and permeability, ladies and gentlemen, as porosity increases here on the left side, permeability increases. On the right side here, as porosity decreases, permeability decreases. I'm going to go back to the left side here. As the spaces in between the rocks, and I'm using the definitions of the vocabulary words, as the spaces in between the rocks get bigger, the amount of water that is able to flow through them gets bigger as well. And by the way, rocks, I mean soil particles. Soil is essentially small pieces of rock. And on the right side, as the spaces in between the rocks get smaller, the ability of water to flow through gets smaller as well. So back to our guiding question. Which city has a smaller particle size, or smaller particle of the soil? Well, that would be the city that has more water above the ground. It's the city that has lowest porosity. It is the city that has the lowest permeability in the soil. And that city is going to be A or B. Well, let me just clarify which city is going to have smaller and larger. All right. So city A, Houston, Texas, will have smaller. And city B will have a larger porosity. City A will have a smaller particle size, and city B will have a larger particle size. Why? Because the smaller particles are so tightly packed together that they have a low porosity. And it allowed water to move up. On the other hand, city B had large particles and it had high porosity. And because it had high porosity, it also had high permeability. City A had low permeability. Okay. Always think of the word permeability as ability of water to move down through the soil. So if it's not moving down through the soil, that means it's going to move up and it's going to flood the landscape. On the other hand, if water is moving down, it's not going to flood, and water is moving down through the soil, below the soil, and filling up the soil underneath the ground, the surface of the earth. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this video on Edpuzzle. Please answer the guiding questions, and any questions that you have, feel free to ask in class. And this is topic number 2, porosity and permeability.